March 7th, 2009 was a momentous day in human history. Humans set foot on Mars for the very first time. A 20-year project that was finally yielding results. However, the public remains unaware of this significant breakthrough to this day. 7 people gave their lives to go to Mars. It was the first step toward colonizing another planet. Typically, such events are broadcast globally. Millions watched intently as bright Horizon 9 landed on Mars. My family gathered in front of the television to witness this historic moment. "Wow, it really feels like we've arrived," said Jackson as he took his first step onto the Martian surface.
Great. Who decided that Jackson would be the first to speak? Those first words are so inspiring.
Cameron replied sarcastically. The images that came back to us were incredible. Seeing people walk on Mars, nearly 30 million kilometers away, was incredible. At that moment, I really felt that human beings were capable of anything. There's always a delay when broadcasting from such a distance. And there was about a 10-minute delay, but in any case, it was incredible. The crew was making jokes as they walked on the surface of Mars for the first time. They attempted to suppress their unease and shock at the sight of their new surroundings. Of course, everyone had already seen pictures of Mars, but seeing someone walk on it and show us the environment from their point of view was really different. "Okay, remember that we're not tourists, so let's try to look professional, at least when we're live on television," said Gordon, the crew leader. Each of them had a camera on their helmet, and since we, as viewers, could see the different cameras, it allowed us to freely switch from one person to another. I've never seen my father this enthusiastic. He had just turned 60, but he was acting like he was a child again. It was incredible for him to be able to witness this, especially since he had already witnessed the moon landing many years before. For several weeks, every moment of the astronauts' lives was broadcast live and readily available online. According to the on-screen counter, over 1 million people watched them daily. Occasionally, there were signal interruptions or a few hours without any broadcast. And of course, they had to sleep at the end of each Martian day. A day over there was called a sol, borrowed from Latin, combining the words solar and day. I kept watching them for an hour every time I got home in the evening. It felt good to think we were living in a time of such advanced scientific development. Part of me dreamed of going to Mars someday. Time flew by, and on April 9th, about a month after our arrival on Mars, I sat down with my father and watched the broadcast of a new crew walk. He collected samples and inspected the underground for future installations. Nothing really interesting, but even that was worth a look. Gordon was usually the one who led the team, although he usually chose Cameron and Jackson to accompany him. This time he also included Anderson, a pretty quiet guy whom I hadn't even noticed before. The crew had stopped at the edge of Valles Marineris, a valley on Mars that was about 3 times the size of the Grand Canyon, and even deeper. In a way, I had grown attached to the crew, having watched them daily for nearly a month. Jackson was really my favorite, and since he was always joking around, it was hard to take him seriously. He was always talking about really funny and often silly things. Gordon, on the other hand, perfectly fulfilled his role as a leader. He was strict, mature, and most importantly, he was empathetic. The rest of the crew members were real geeks, except for Anderson. They had all been carefully chosen to make sure they did their jobs properly. Cameron, the only woman on the crew, was the smartest. She was responsible for most of the maintenance on the station. During their expedition, we mostly followed Jackson, only cutting away when he was doing uninteresting things, like picking up rocks. "Well, that's really peculiar," said Jackson as he looked at the horizon.
Well, yeah. Do you still think it looks like Arizona, dummy?
Asked Cameron mischievously. She tended to tease Jackson, and he would respond with his own jabs. Despite their differences, they were a wonderful pair. They reminded me of 2 high school students flirting. It was really touching to see how life went on, even on another planet. The next day was a particularly gloomy day on Mars, and the sun was setting, which meant that the crew would soon have to return to the station. The sunset on Mars was really different from the romantic sunsets we had on Earth. On Mars, they were blue and cold. It was stranger than it was beautiful, and it gave a feeling of imminent danger. I think I definitely prefer the Earth sunset. said Jackson.
It will likely be a long time before we see one again,
answered Cameron. If, of course, they actually decided to come and get us, added Jackson. Once the sun was almost completely set, Gordon ordered everyone to pack up their things. The crew, of course, followed his orders, but they didn't look happy about having to stop their work before the crew finished gathering all their things. The audio completely glitched, and there was no image on the screen anymore. It wasn't a big deal, and happened occasionally, but it had nearly become routine. The connection was restored after a few minutes, just as I returned to the living room with tea. My father, however, was closely watching the screen. This time, we followed Gordon. The first thing we heard was someone out of breath. Did anyone see that? Asked Anderson. The fact that Anderson, someone so strong and quiet, started speaking with terror in his voice was not a good sign at all. But what? Asked Gordon. I saw something move, said Anderson, before anyone could have a chance to check what he was saying. Jackson, looking completely panicked, interrupted them. Can you hear me? Jackson shouted. We switched cameras to see what Jackson was seeing as he tried to find his crew.
Calm down, Jackson. We're still here. There was just a power issue earlier. It's just a bug,
Cameron replied. So why can't I see you? He asked. At that moment, I decided to switch to Gordon's camera. And even though the environment we saw on his camera was exactly the same as Jackson's, the latter was out of sight. Did you go somewhere, Jackson? What are your coordinates? Asked Gordon. But no, I haven't moved, damn it. He shouted back. Stay calm, we'll locate you. When I was back at Jackson's camera, I could see a very blurry shape flying toward him at an incredible speed. He let out a brief scream before the camera cut off, leaving only a black screen.
Jackson, can you hear me?
Cameron asked. Jackson? The crew looked at each other in turn, shocked. The broadcast automatically switched back to Cameron.
Is it?
Yes? Asked Cameron. I don't know. According to his global positioning system, he's not there anymore. Call Laval, ask them to look for him. I'll check if he hasn't fallen off one of the cliffs, said Gordon, gesturing to Cameron.
Control, do you copy me?
Asked Cameron. No response.
Control, Daniel?
Did she repeat?
Gordon, they're not answering.
The astronauts didn't dare suggest why. They were unsure whether to go back to the station or remain to locate Jackson. We have to go back to the station. Finally, said Anderson.
And Jackson?
Asked Cameron.
Can't we leave Jackson? If the station is compromised, we're doomed regardless.
The crew hurried back to Bright Horizon 9. None of them said a word. Meanwhile, Gordon was in the lead and kept turning around to make sure the whole crew was following him. After checking, he realized that Anderson had simply disappeared while running behind them to reach the station. Where is it that he could have gone? Asked Gordon.
I don't know, damn it. He was right behind me just a second ago,
stammered Cameron. All the other cameras were turned off, even the ones inside the station. The rest of the remaining crew members didn't take long to reach the station. The doors had been left open, but none of the missing members were inside. Gordon was growing increasingly tense, losing his composure.
Damn, what happened to them?
He said.
I don't know. I've locked all the doors and I'm going to try to search for their heat signature.
Continuing, Cameron started desperately pressing the buttons on the console, rescanning the entire station.
They are not here. Wait.
I couldn't understand what the computer she was looking at was saying because it was far beyond my skills. I just had my eyes glued to the screen, and neither my father nor I said a word. In Cameron's voice, I could detect a hint of hope.
I think the Jackson Gabzer tracker will—
Start up! She cried out with joy. Gordon headed toward the door. I'm going back outside to find her. Stay here. Don't open the door until I return, he said. The words coming out of his mouth were those of someone brave and courageous. But he couldn't conceal the quiver in his voice. Cameron tried to refuse his orders. I switched back to Gordon's point of view. Night had fallen on Mars, seeming darker than any night I had witnessed on Earth, even with Mars's 2 moons. The camera attached to Gordon's helmet couldn't even pick up the light. The flashlight he brought made no difference. Keep talking to me, Cameron? Gordon asked nervously. It shouldn't take me long before I join Jackson.
Do you see anything moving around you?
Nothing, it's too dark, said Gordon. Wait, Jackson's tracker is moving toward me. He paused and checked where Jackson was supposed to be, according to the tracker. Wait a second, he's going over 80 kilometers an hour. That's not... Everything went silent and his camera turned off. Once again I switched to Cameron, who was sitting there, shocked and devastated. She didn't even try to shout her classmate's name. She knew that the whole crew had disappeared. And suddenly, she just stood up and walked toward the kitchen. And then, without saying a word, she grabbed a knife and slit her throat. Since the story was told from her perspective, it was difficult to know precisely what transpired. But the spurts of blood and the sounds she made with her throat gave us a clue about what had just happened. It felt like it took an eternity before the sounds coming from her throat finally stopped. But as she struggled to take one last breath, a creature appeared. You couldn't see anything except a blurry silhouette, far too tall and far too thin to be that of a human being. I don't know why, but the camera refused to focus on the thing, even as it got closer and closer. The thing bent down to look at Cameron's lifeless body. And for a second, I felt like he didn't understand what had happened. As if he was unaware of the concept of suicide. The thing quickly realized that the camera was watching it and moved its face very close to it. A second later, all the cameras stopped again, but this time, instead of the screens going black, they were replaced by the image of the horrible creature. The radio, which had turned on by itself, began emitting an unbearable screeching noise. The sound was louder than anything I had ever heard, and even putting my hands over my ears didn't help at all. The noise I was hearing was a kind of incessant scream. It was rhythmic, a bit like a Morse code message, but faster and more erratic. The sound wasn't just coming from my radio. In fact, all the electronic devices that were connected to the internet started playing the same sound. It was horrible throughout the whole house. But not only that. I felt I could hear the sound from the neighbor's house and the cars passing near my place. I felt like the entire world could hear that noise. That's when I noticed that my father was sitting still, his eyes fixed on the television screen. I tried to get his attention, but I couldn't. It looked like he was in some kind of trance. I don't know if it was because of the sound or something else. But suddenly, everything in the house went out. These events took place a month ago. And since then, all the evidence of the entire trip to Mars has miraculously disappeared. Recent newspapers claim we never went to Mars, according to what I've seen. My parents then convinced me to go see a therapist. And for a while, I also thought I was going crazy. I'm sharing this because I'm desperately seeking someone who witnessed the same thing I did. I don't know why, but I remember everything. But I can't be the only one in this situation. It's impossible. These things, whatever they are, killed an entire crew without making a sound. They took control of Bright Horizon 9. All the while erasing humanity's collective memory. They need all the events erased from our minds. Because otherwise we might have been able to fight back. Or maybe it's because they've planned to do something against us. If that's the case, it means we're not ready at all. I really hope I'm just crazy, because if that's not the case, it means they're coming.